If the narcissist has a false self, can't they just drop it? I get why people ask it. If the problem is the mask, if the problem is a performance, and if the problem is something that the narcissist is doing on purpose, then the solution is obvious, right? Just stop, take it off, and be real. Except that's not what we're dealing with a narcissist. And the reason why is I think the most disturbing thing about the pathological narcissism, once you really understand it, is that the narcissist doesn't have a false self that's they're wearing. The narcissist is the false self. Sam Vaknin points out that the narcissist experiences the false self exactly the way you experience your authentic self. So let that sink in for a second. When you wake up in the morning and you know you're you, not because of your job, not because of your relationships, not because of what anyone thinks of you, just because there's a continuity in your experience that says, I am me. I've always been me. I will be me tomorrow. That sense of continuity is yourself. And it's real. And it's grounded in actual development, actual relationships, and actual experiences integrated over time. The narcissist has that same sense of continuity, but it doesn't come from a real self, it comes from a false self. A presentation that is not them in an authentic sense, which requires a lot of upkeep. I'll explain that in a bit. Vaknin says that the narcissist is constitutionally incapable of telling the difference. They are convinced at the level of experience, not just as a performance, that the false self is who they are. It's not a mask they're holding up. It's not a lie they're telling. The false self insists it is true. And, and because the experience is identical to what a healthy person feels when they're in contact with their authentic self, the narcissist has no reason to believe otherwise. So, when someone says to a narcissist, just be yourself, the narcissist thinks they are. That's who they're being. And when people reject that, the narcissist experiences it as exactly the way you'd experience someone rejecting the core of who you are. Which is why narcissistic injury is so catastrophic. The false self isn't a strategy. It's a substitution of reality itself. Where does this come from? Donald Winnicott, a British pediatrician and in object relations theory, describes the false self in the 1960s. He was working with children who had been raised in conditions of invasion, abuse, and invalidation, children whose authentic impulses and needs were not permitted to exist. And what he observed was that these children, in response, developed a secondary self, a construction that performed compliance, that appeared to adapt, and that seemed normal, while the actual self remained hidden or were never fully formed. Helen Deutsch had earlier described that what she called the as-if personality. As-if personality were people who function by imitating normal emotional responses without having the actual feelings underneath. Winnicott's contribution was to show that this wasn't just imitation, it was a structural adaptation. The false self was a survival mechanism that became the self. In pathological narcissism, this process goes further. Sam Vaknin describes it as the child constructing an imaginary friend that gradually transforms into a deity, an all-powerful, godlike, omniscient, all-knowing, perfect being, which then merges with the child and becomes what we call the narcissist. The child was helpless, so the false self is omnipotent. The child was told it was worthless, so the false self is perfect. The child couldn't predict the adult around it, so the false self is omniscient. The false self was protective. It was the child's response to an environment that was genuinely hostile, genuinely unpredictable, genuinely crushing. By inventing this alternate identity, the child could survive, could function, could feel some version of power in the world where the child had none. But here's the cost. The false self is not connected to reality. It is a story the child told themselves, and the child became so invested in the story that the story became the person. The narcissist is the human sacrificed to their own creation. Here's where it gets technically interesting, and I promise I'll get back to something more practical in a bit. Freud described what he called the synthetic function of the ego. The synthetic function of the ego is the ability to take conflicting experiences, conflicting emotions, conflicting inputs, and weave them into a coherent narrative about who you are and what your life means. Ambivalence, which is loving someone and resenting them at the same time, gets processed by the synthetic function into something workable. You integrate it, you make a decision, you move forward with some sense of continuity. This is what a healthy self does. It synthesizes. The narcissist's false self provides a counterfeit version of this. It's a feigned, fake, imitated, emulated mimicry of the synthetic function. It runs on faulty software. The sense of continuity is glitchy, disjointed, and dissociative. The narcissist experiences themselves as fragmented, which is why they're constantly trying to shore it up with external validation. The narcissistic supply with a constant reassurance that the story they're telling themselves is still working. The narcissist's coherence is borrowed from other people's responses. Remove those responses and the supply, puncture the shared fantasy, refuse to collude, and the whole architecture starts to shake. This is where it gets dark, and this is more clinically specific and not recommended as a strategy, by the way. Vaknin coined something called narcissistic mortification. Mortification is the moment when the false self meets undeniable reality. This is not just criticism, not just feedback, not someone being mean to them. Mortification is the shattering experience of being seen, not as the false self presents itself, but as it actually is. And it is terrifying in a way that goes beyond ordinary shame. Here's the delineation between fear and terror. Fear is anticipatory. You know something bad might happen. Terror is reactive. Something terrible has happened and you're in it. Mortification is terror. The narcissist sees the internal representation of themselves, the snapshot they took of themselves, the version of themselves they built inside their mind, come to life and attack. Like a photograph walking out of the album and mocking you. Like every defense you built suddenly turning on you. And here's what makes this specifically, especially disorienting. The narcissist didn't just fail. The narcissist was wrong about who they are. That's the difference. Failure is external. You tried something and it didn't work. Mortification is internal. The story you told yourself about your own identity just collapsed. And the narcissist has no other story. There is no backup. When this happens, the narcissist doesn't process, they don't grieve, they don't reflect. The defenses activate immediately and all at once. Narcissists split. Splitting, which is the world is either all good or all bad, and right now it's all bad, so everyone is the enemy. Denial isn't just denial. This isn't just happening. I can reverse this. Magical thinking is, I can perform my way out of this. If I just say the right things, make the right gestures, the narrative will restore itself. Vaknin says they become buffoonishly grandiose, overcorrecting, trying to reassert the godlike self before the collapse completes. The exaggeration becomes absurd to everyone watching, but from inside it feels like survival. And underneath all of that, annihilation terror. The original terror that the child was trying to escape when they built the false self in the first place. The narcissist's entire personality structure feels like It's unraveling like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. All the carefully constructed internal objects, the representations of the people in their life, start behaving in ways the narcissists didn't script. And there's nothing to hold on to because the false self is the only organizing principle they have. Narcissists who've been through it say it feels like being annihilated, disintegrating into molecules, into thin air, gone, experientially gone. The self that was there a moment ago no longer exists, and the only way to stop it is to rebuild the false self immediately, completely, with whatever resources are available. Which is why narcissists do not come out of mortification having learned something about themselves. They come out having learned that they need more supply, more validation, more people willing to play their role in the shared fantasy. The mortification doesn't open them up. It makes the architecture more rigid. Bakhtin calls what the narcissist does after a mortification altruistic surrender, one of the more counterintuitive defense responses. The narcissist will sometimes confess, take responsibility, display remorse, even self-abase, but not because they've actually encountered their authentic self, but because they are temporarily so destabilized that they'll say anything to restore the architecture. It's an appeasement strategy, not genuine accountability. The moment the false self is restored, the confession is forgotten, the remorse evaporates, and the narcissist is back to telling the story where nothing was their fault. Bakhtin suggests that only mortification can potentially open the door to something real because only an experience that destroys the false self's ability to maintain its fiction can create the condition where something genuine might emerge. The narcissist seeking a partner who will wake them up. Some narcissists gravitate toward partners specifically because those partners will eventually refuse to sustain the fantasy. The partner becomes the instrument of mortification, not because the narcissist chose healing, but because the false self miscalculated. It chose a partner it thought it could control, and the partner's reality proved too much for the architecture. This is the paradox of narcissistic healing. The only door is one the narcissist experiences as annihilation, and the narcissist's entire structure is designed to prevent them from ever walking through it. Cold therapy, which creates mortification, is a therapeutic approach that deliberately creates conditions where the false self cannot maintain its fiction, through confrontation, through the systematic withdrawal of collusion from the false self, which the false self requires to function. I can talk about what OLNE offers as an alternative structure approach in a moment. So back to the original question. Can't they just drop it? No, and now you know why. The resistance is not stubbornness, it's not pride, it's not even defense mechanism in the simple sense. It's that the false self is the only ground the narcissist has. There is no authentic self underneath waiting to emerge. Winnicott described both the true self and the false self as internal objects, but the narcissist has only the false self. The true self was never adequately formed or was so thoroughly invalidated that it retreated and never fully developed. When someone tells a narcissist to just be themselves, they are asking them to find something that isn't there. And when they can't find it because it doesn't exist, the mortification is catastrophic. The narcissist experiences it as an attack on the only self they have. This is the architecture of resistance. The false self was built to solve a problem, the problem of a hostile, invalidating environment that could not tolerate the child's authentic self. And it solved it. It worked. The child became a functioning, if deeply disturbed, adult. But now the solution is the problem. The false self won't release its grip because releasing it means facing the annihilation terror that it was built to prevent. You cannot negotiate with the false self. You cannot reason it into releasing. It is holding on to its existence because it is a narcissist's existence. The resistance is absolute because the alternative is ego death in the most literal sense. This is also why the inner critic in narcissism is so uniquely vicious. The inner voice that torments the narcissist, the relentless voice that says you're not good enough, you're a fraud, everyone will find out, you're nothing. This is not the opposite of the false self. It is the false self's last line of defense. It punishes any authentic impulse before it can surface. The moment something real starts to emerge, a genuine feeling, a real vulnerability, a moment of authentic contact with another person, the inner critic attacks because authentic contact threatens the architecture. Authentic contact means the false self is not all there is, and the false self cannot allow that. This is the loop that keeps the narcissist locked in. The false self creates a godlike inner critic that punishes any approach to reality, which keeps the narcissist dependent on the false self, which requires constant external colluders to sustain it. Which means the narcissist must keep the world at the level of internal objects and snapshots. This is what we'll look at in the next episode, how that inner critic works, why it's so brutal, and what it takes to begin to loosen its grip. Bakhtin describes a structural problem. The false self requires other people to collude with it. And this is a very important distinction when it comes to facilitating your relationships. Counterintuitively, not because the narcissist is consciously manipulating, though they are, but because the false self can only survive in a relational context that sustains it, i.e., a collusion. And this collusion is called the shared fantasy. The other person agrees, consciously or not consciously, to be a character in the narcissist's private religion, which is why it's very much like being inducted into a cult. This is why the false self doesn't just dissolve on its own. It isn't an individual problem with an individual solution. It's a relational architecture, and it requires a relational intervention. One of the primary premises in the book OLNE is called co-independence, and co-independence is the first break in that architecture. Co-independence requires that you actually want the other person's well-being for their sake, genuinely, not as an exchange, not as a supply management, not as a strategy to keep them from getting angry at you. If your care is contingent on what it gets you, you are colluding. The false self can operate in that exchange indefinitely. It knows that program perfectly. But the moment someone is actually present, actually seeing you, actually invested in your real well-being, actually resilient enough to not need you to perform, the false self starts to lose its ground. Because you can't maintain a fiction with someone who is perceiving you accurately. The performance becomes unsustainable. One of the three pillars in the book OLNE is non-judgmental acceptance. Non-judgmental acceptance is the second structural break. Acceptance means seeing the other person as they actually are, not as an extension of your needs, not as an internal object, not as a character in your narrative. The false self is sustained precisely by keeping other people at the level of internal representations. Acceptance, the willingness to see someone as they actually are without needing them to be something else, short circuits that entirely. This is not about being nice to narcissists. It's not about tolerating bad behavior. It's about the structural reality that the false self can only survive in implicit collusions. And OLNE is designed to break that collusion, not through confrontation, but through presence. Presence is what the false self cannot survive. On the next episode, the sadistic inner critic, why the voice that tells the narcissist that they're not enough is actually the false self's final fortress, and what it takes to face it without being destroyed by it is going to be really interesting. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching this video. Check out this track from the album Final Shared Fantasy called Borderline.
I know your hands by heart, your keys in the bowl, your shoes by the door. You look at me so soft, like you don't know I keep one foot on the floor. I kiss like I'm staying, then I count every exit in the dark. 'Cause I can feel it come in the shape of the break. I hear it in my name when you say it that way. I'm gone before goodbye, I'm gone before goodbye. I leave before I'm left, I ruin it first, that's mine. I'm gone before goodbye, I'm gone before goodbye. I love you like a storm and run before the sky. You made a home out of me, a place I didn't know how to deserve. So I start pulling nails out the floorboards one by one, just to be sure I see the end in your smile, and I turn it into a wound. 'Cause I can feel it come in the shape of the break. I hear it in my name when you say it that way. I'm gone before goodbye, I'm gone before goodbye. I leave before I'm left, I ruin it first, that's mine. I'm gone before goodbye, I'm gone before goodbye. I love you like a storm and run before the sky. I wanted to stay so badly, I couldn't breathe, I wanted your hands on me, and that's exactly why I ran. I wanted to stay so badly, I couldn't breathe. If I stood there one more second, I'd have let you see me fall apart. I'm gone before goodbye, I'm gone before goodbye. I leave before I'm left, I ruin it first, that's mine.